last panel of the day. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to remind people we have our swap meet, which we've done at the last several celebrations. It's a big event where if you've been shopping the dealer floor or trading with friends, you might see an interesting selection of toys and collectibles at our swap meet, because this is the case where like collectors, fans, some dealers bring their stuff to sell, trade, buy, and so that's just down in our social area. It's starting at 7 o'clock, and it'll be running for a couple hours. So if you've never attended one of these, absolutely recommend it. It's some of the coolest stuff, and it's a great way to mingle with other collectors. So before introducing the next topic, this is an interesting one. The Power of the Force 2 line. How many of you remember collecting in 1995 when it first was released? Wow. All right, yeah. So me too. In fact, I remember when it first debuted, and on the internet, everybody was so eager to hear about it, and we were all like, which areas is it going to be released first? And I remember in the Midwest was the first area in the country that was starting to get them. And I actually was so desperate to see these, because in the Northwest we were not getting them as fast, that I had somebody like overnight them to me, a couple like Han and Luke. And I went to a convention the weekend that I got them, and no one in the Northwest had seen these figures. And it turned out Mark Hamill was appearing at this convention, and I showed him the Luke, Power of the Force 2 Luke, and he's like, wow, Luke's been working out. That was his reaction. So, but anyway, these guys are going to cover some really interesting stuff, a lot that you probably have never heard about. And the panel is the toys that made us Power of the Force 2. And so I want to introduce Brian Volkweiss, Rich Mayerick, and Billy Galaxy.
Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you all for being here. I know many of you, if you're familiar with the show, you all have a question on your mind, and I just want to get it off the table. I don't want any elephants of any color in the room. Yes, there still is a season 3. We were not canceled. It was not thrown out after we shot it. We were actually delivering it to Netflix all this month, and we hope to have a release date very soon, and actually some really good news after that. So we get asked that about. And I don't say this because we take offense to it. Every single time we get the question, we take it as a compliment. We get asked dozens and dozens of times a day, no matter what we post or what we say. Yeah, but where's season 3? So it is coming. A little bit about the tape you just saw, and this is another announcement. You're going to hear it here first. This is shocking toys that made us news you're about to hear. That clip, we were very lazy, and rather than just cut something brand new, we pulled that from the DVD that is coming out next month. What do you think of that? All right, so yeah, seasons 1 and seasons 2 are both coming out next month on DVD. They are going to have a lot of extras. We didn't put season 3 on, or maybe future seasons maybe, because we want you to buy more DVDs in 2021, 2022. But anyway, I'm here with Rich. Rich might have one of the most unique career paths in the history of Hollywood. He started off on season 1 as a clearance person, I guess.
It's the most boring job in the entire
Yeah,
set.
basically Rich's job at season 1 was, when we'd get clips or stuff from toys, he would research it all to make sure it was accurate, but he would also check the legality to make sure that we didn't get sued. And Rich, by season 3, is now a full-blown producer, and I have never heard of that happening before. And Rich also makes me look like I've never heard of a toy or seen a toy. So it was very good to have Rich every second of the day. And Billy Galaxy owns one of the greatest vintage toy shops in the world up in Portland, Oregon. I started going there long before the show sold to Netflix. And he's also very funny and very knowledgeable. And again, compared to me, actually knows everything about what he's talking about as it relates to toys, and specifically the topic of this panel.
I can at least act like I do.
Well, you pull it off.
So yeah, let's talk about Power of the Force 2, and I guess we can start before Power of the Force 2 was released and kind of where things were with Star Wars toys.
Here actually might be a good Here might be a good question to ask. How many people in here have seen the Star Wars episode of Toys That Made Us?
Wow.
All right. So in case you haven't watched it in the last 25 days, just please remember Hasbro had paid a fortune to get the rights back from Lucasfilm after Hasbro had forgotten to send that $10,000 check. So Hasbro had to monetize that. They had guaranteed a lot of money to George Lucas. So they had to monetize it, and this led to rushing out, I don't know about rushing, but getting out figures directly connected to the traditional line as the prequels were gearing up.
And yeah, before that, I think if you wanted a Star Wars toy, there were the Just Toys Bendums. And that was
The only toys that might be worse than the Power of the Force 2 toys.
but the only toys that were available. And I mean, it's weird to think now of a time when Star Wars wasn't ubiquitous on toy shelves, but there was a time when it was kind of a thing of the past. And
At
it was,
least 8 years.
yeah, where people were just like, I'm on to other things, it's Turtles and whatnot. But there
Season
was
3 spoiler, Turtles.
synergy. But there were a few things that kind of reinvigorated the passion and the desire for more Star Wars things. And one of the biggest is actually the Laserdisc re-release of the original trilogy. Kind of got people back into the Star Wars groove, and it was also released on VHS. And I think this was one of the first kind of like seeds that were planted for people who, because I mean, up until a point too, people weren't watching these movies on a regular basis either. There was something that you would watch on like the Sunday night, special.
Or rent them at a video store or whatever.
Those what are those video stores?
That's a thing they used to have. If, anybody's too young to remember them.
Right. So these came out, and I want to say some post office type stuff came out as well. And then
Stamps. They were called stamps.
Put them on letters. And then there's the Just Toys in all their glory. And,
And again, for anyone here who's probably under the age of maybe 35, for about 8 years, this is all, not the potato chips, those 2 figures. I remember being a kid and seeing those in a store, being like, oh my God, I haven't seen anything new that's Star Wars in like 8 years. So as horrible as they are, or were, or are if you're in
They're still
Billy
horrible.
Galaxy store, this was it for a long time.
And then we get the first hints of the new line coming. And I don't know about you guys, but it did something to me. I would spend all my time outside of school tracking these things down. Like I would go to every Toys R Us within 20 miles, every Walmart.
We had different mothers, so I did not do that.
But it for me, it basically kind of started the whole collecting bug for me. Like it was my first kind of like, I'm collecting toys as a young adult, but an adult. Because before that, I'd also kind of stopped buying toys for a bit. I was on to other things, sports and girlfriends and stuff. And then toys became a thing for me where I was buying these things not to open, but to actually keep in a package and have as a collector's item. And we have a commercial here. So there's the first series, the orange cards in all their buffed up glory. And I mean, these things weren't happening in a vacuum either. I mean, this was kind of a trend in toys. Like the G.I. Joe Extreme line, I don't know if you guys remember that from Hasbro. Kenner actually worked on that one too, but they were G.I. Joe characters that were kind of hulked up as well. And I don't know how many comic readers are out there, but I don't know if you guys read Rob Liefeld comics back in the 90s, but those guys were pretty buffed up too. So there's definitely something that was in the air at the time to influence the style and the aesthetic of these guys and why they were all hulked up.
Well, I actually met with the Kenner designer last week, and he specifically cited Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and what they were doing with Spawn and the whole independent
G.I.
comics market as the major influence on this line, at least for the younger designers at Kenner.
And what was interesting to me as we were making the Star Wars episode of the show was at Hasbro at the time, very few people who had worked on the original Kenner line were a part of this. So a lot of decisions were being made not by the people who had made the original Star Wars figures and had risked everything, including the financial existence of Kenner. They were just going with, for lack of a better word, data research or seeing what the neighbors were doing. In this case, like you said, McFarlane. And they were like, well, McFarlane's doing muscles, we should do muscles. And not really taking into account, A, what the fans thought, but B, what the fans wanted and what mattered to them as it related to Star Wars.
Or what they thought the fans wanted, which was a gross misinterpretation.
Right,
Sure.
it's the opposite of what they wanted.
I mean, some of the figures were great. This C-3PO figure is probably one of the best of the original series. It actually takes everything that was great about the original one and adds a little bit more movie-accurate dimensions, but he doesn't have the muscles of the Han Solo.
The little wire muscles.
little bit.
Out of Star Wars and into your hand. It's an exclusive Kenner action figure. Han Solo disguised as a stormtrooper. Free with 2 proofs from Kellogg's Fruit Loop cereal. May the Force be with you.
I was very excited for that promotion. Begged my parents.
And all of my housemates ate so many Fruit Loops because of that commercial. We actually have a Fruit Loops box on the table over there that's still full, if anybody wants to admire it later.
But shortly after the line started getting, on the shelves, they did understand that some of these sculpts needed to get refined a bit. So you see the monkey face buffed up
Wait,
Leia.
everyone always talks about her monkey face. They don't talk very often about this is like heavily armed Leia.
You don't remember when
This
she
is-
was
This is die
running
hard,
out,
die hard Leia. Yeah.
Yeah, that was from the deleted scene. In both figures. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's ready to kill.
She was rocking a blaster in A New Hope.
Right. And there's the more orange cards. I had a double of a time tracking down that Boba Fett for like at least a
Boba
month.
Fett.
Boba Fett. Yeah, that was exciting. I mean, again, like I was too young to miss the original Star Wars collecting fervor. I was like 3. So this was huge to me because I kind of lived vicariously through my cousin when I was younger. He was older than me, and he told me about most of my original knowledge for Star Wars figures. So for me, this had to have been exactly what you were probably going through.
No, very different. Very different in a household in Queens.
Oh, okay. But the other cool thing about this line, too, is we started getting more characters that we didn't get in the original line, such as Lax Sivrak here, who was on frame for, I think, maybe a second or 2.
Right around there.
Right around there. But for me, as a guy who loves obscure characters, these were the guys that I was most excited about, because I was always kind of curious about who that guy is, like right past Luke's shoulder in Jabba's palace, like all the guys you didn't really know their name right away, but had the coolest costumes and like creature designs.
But it's funny for me, this was the thing where I was like, I didn't care about the bizarreness of the muscles and the way too many weapons that weren't on screen. What I cared about was like, oh my God, like they're going for it. Like they're gonna do everybody. Like that's what blew me away when this was going on.
Right, because they went pretty deep in the original line too. So like at the time you're like, well, who else is there? But
Right,
there were a lot of
exactly.
guys left.
Yeah.
A ton. And the other cool thing too is we actually got some screen accurate costumes like Greedo over there in his cool space tracksuit. Because I don't know if you guys remember, in the original one, he's basically wearing a leotard. And I think they did that with Snaggletooth too, where they're just like, close enough. The colors match, that's what he wore. But for these, we actually got their actual screen-worn costumes, which is also pretty cool to me too. And of course, everyone was actually able to find a yak face because God knows what those things, yeah. So you can actually just go to like Kmart and pick up a yak face instead of having to spend $400. Because at this time, even in the early 90s, the vintage figures were already creeping up in value.
Yeah, he was up there at that time.
Yeah. There was a window of time, I think, around like the early 90s when people were so centric on the new stuff that a lot of the older toy lines kind of fell by the wayside, and you could scoop up stuff like on the cheap. But the Star Wars figures were the ones that still held their value. So where you can go and get like a bunch of He-Man figures for like, 20 for $10. Like you're still paying out the leg for vintage Star Wars. And then there's some more. There's a Hansa, orange cards. So the holofoils. This is a big deal because this is the other thing that kind of sparks the variant craze, which was rampant in the series, because not only did you have hollow foils, non-hollow foils, but you had short sabers in long trays, and people were losing their minds over this stuff. And it's funny, you go back and you think about it now, and you're like, what difference does it make whether his lightsaber is in a longer tray or not? But
Well, and people even got into the assortment numbers on the back.
Oh yeah,
You know,
no,
the
any sort of
decimal
nuance and variance that existed, these were all over the price guides, which is another interesting thing to talk about, is because these came out around a time when collecting online was in its infancy. So you had
That's right.
sites like Brian's Toys, and you had eBay in its infancy, and this was like the first time that people were actually, looking at these things as investment pieces as much as collectibles. And that definitely drove the desire to have these variants and the nuance and the packaging and the figures. And it kind of created this weird window of collecting madness that happened in like the 90s and the 2000s when everyone was buying toys and not opening them, which is also why a lot of that stuff from that era isn't worth anything, because everyone had the idea that they were going to retire on their toy collections.
And the other thing to point out, and just either remind you of or make you aware of, depending on your age, is we thought it was over. Like, we all thought there was no more Star Wars. Like this, so as everything started heading towards what would become the Phantom Menace, this was all, very similar to how many people, or at least just speaking for myself, when I heard that, there was going to be what would become The Force Awakens, like, oh my God, I didn't think we would ever see this again. Or, to take a non-Star Wars reference, a sequel to Blade Runner? Everybody in this room probably spent 98% of their lives thinking, why on earth, how on earth could there ever be another sequel to Blade Runner? The movie bombed, yes, it's beautiful. And then you read one day, they're making a sequel, and Harrison Ford's in it. And this was what it was like back then, where they brought the AT-AT out again, they brought the Millennium Falcon out again, but this time it had lasers that may or may not should have been there, but that's not for me to decide. But that was the feeling, this euphoria, that as silly as Leia and Lando may look now, it really was this amazing time of, yeah, don't worry about the six-pack, but oh my God, as you were saying, wow, the lightsabers are shorter. Well, no, it's the tray for the lightsaber. Really? Like, it was that amazing, partially, and I would argue largely, because nobody thought there would ever be another Lando figure or another Yoda figure.
Did the euphoria of having all this back excuse the special editions, such as removing Yup Nub from the end of Jedi and other misgivings?
I would argue, and I know I'm in the minority on this, and I know it's a different panel, but the few things that were added that made it better were almost worth that was a slip, almost worth the nonsense, that like carving out the walls in Cloud City. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's a different movie. It's hard to watch the originals just seeing those white walls. Yes, the Jabba thing is absurd. So, yeah.
But they made a box set out of that scene.
I know.
And they made there's some weird droid that doesn't look like he belongs anywhere in the Star Wars universe, but he was made for the special editions, and they made a figure of him. He's like the Asp droid or something, but I bought it because I love
The
robots.
asteroid?
No, it's Asp.
It's an asteroid for
It's
sure.
a different panel. Different panel.
Oh my God.
Keep it clean, Rich. It's kids. It's kids here.
But yeah, you're right. There was a lot of great stuff. Like, the battle scenes were awesome, but again, there were things that they probably didn't need to do. I missed that song.
The six-pack.
The six-pack. And so there's some of the cameos that ended up in figure form in the Power of the Force 2. I think that guy on the left was Pote Snitkin. I don't know how they come up with these names.
They're good, though.
Just ask their toddlers, what's that guy's name? But I love Monsters and Werewolves, so Lax Sivrak over there on the right is probably one of my favorites. And then we also got Admiral Piat, who was ever originally supposed to be in the original line, but he didn't make it. And I love that dude. He's always on the verge of getting force choked to death, but he somehow manages to avert disaster each time. And then he went out in a blazing glory. But him and Veers. Now, Veers did have an action figure in the original line and the Power of the Force 2 line, but they stubbornly refused to ever actually call him Veers. He's always just the AT-AT commander, which is kind of offensive because I think that dude is probably one of the most competent guys in the entire Imperial forces. He just really on point.
Solid victory.
Goes down to Hoth. Hoth says,
ambiguity.
I'm going to blow up the shield generator, and it's done in like 20 minutes later.
He got it done.
Got it done. Just dusted his hands and goes to dinner. It's great. Yeah. Veers is awesome. Give him his name on his toys. And there's Piet, and then my revised C-3PO.
What is he holding, by the way? Like a laser toothpick?
He's
What
got,
is that?
That is like a cattle prod?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did he have that in the movie?
I don't think so,
Yeah.
because if he did, then Admiral Ozzel wouldn't be giving him such a hard time, because he could just like...
And again, my memory isn't what it used to be. Did Chewbacca have a rifle longer than his leg?
I mean, if he had that rifle, he probably wouldn't be using the bowcaster, right?
Probably.
But
Yeah.
again, this was something that, and I
Those are
love
bizarre choices.
I love Kenner to death, but they had a tendency to like just throw weapons in.
Yeah.
I feel like there were a lot of times that people thought Darth Vader was going to come with a rocket launcher, which never happened, thank goodness. But yeah, I mean, the more weapons, the better.
But to your point, 3PO, still gorgeous.
Still gorgeous. It's still a great figure.
Look at that guy.
Yeah. And then we got some mailways too. We got the Cantina Band, and then the Death Star Gunner, who again you could pick up on the cheap and not have to pay out the year for. One of the coolest designs. But so this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like we saw the publications, right? So we have Lee's Action Figure, Tom Art's Lee's Toy Fair, and I don't know about you guys, but I would pick these up every month, like clockwork, and like meticulously look and see how much is all my stuff worth. And it's crazy how I would treat these Power of the Force 2 carded figures at that time like Kirby originals. Like people would come by and I'd pull it out of I'd actually have like cardboard boxes I would keep them in, keep the light away from me. Like, I just picked these up last week. Just don't.
What's amazing to me is you did all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
I didn't do any of this stuff, but according to what you said earlier, you did have girlfriends.
I did.
Which I did not.
Miraculous.
So this is very interesting.
I mean, to be fair,
you're very confident.
the setup that I had back at my parents' house is nothing like the one that I have in Los Angeles. And I have a very patient, wonderful, amazing girlfriend who's willing to sacrifice an entire room of our place for a toy collection.
And
you understand that.
We have an editing bay with an editor in it, not working on this show, who's also very patient because Rich has put part of his collection in her bay. So
Yeah,
let's give a shout out to Alex.
Alex, thank you so much
Thank you, Alex,
for
if
letting
you're
me
watching.
keep my toys in your office for a limited amount of time.
Cisco, not a fan.
No, not a fan. That's another story. Did you buy these guys too?
I mean, I essentially made a career out of it.
You did, actually.
I did.
That's a good segue.
That's where I started, was buying these, and people would pay stupid prices for them because of these price guides. And I fortunately had the good taste or good sense or whatever to stop selling them well before the bottom fell out of the market and do strictly vintage, which, as you can see on the show floor, is only going up and up and up.
And for those of you who have never been to Billy's store in Portland, it's like going to a museum where you can buy like the exhibits. It is truly one of the greatest toy stores in this country. So whenever you're in Portland, you should check it out. Sorry, Billy.
Thanks.
I had to do a commercial for a second.
Get some biscuits, go to your store. Was it Pine State?
Pine State?
Pine State, so good. But yeah, that guy knows. Were people coming into your store hungry for Power of the Force 2? Is that?
Well, I mean, when I first opened my store, which was in late '95, I would estimate at least 90% of my sales were Star Wars, be it vintage or this stuff. And it was that way for a few years, I'd say, until the prequels launched, and I think then we had a similar thing that happened with the last film.
Sure.
Or I guess the film before that, but
No, people were rabid for those prequel figures.
yeah, I mean, I couldn't, I'd go to Toys R Us every morning on my way to work and buy them and then resell them, which I don't know. I've never understood the scalping thing. It was hard to stomach for, the period it took to get my store on its feet. And, I mean, people still do it with all the Black Series and all that. I don't know, I just wish they'd let kids buy them. Then their investments would pay off more because kids would be ruining them instead of, people hoarding them in their attics.
Well, there were dealers who would come in and buy them by the case before they even hit the floor. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I got a job in college at Toys R Us just so.
You did not.
No, I did, yeah. So
No, I believe you. You did
I
not
also
tell
had
me
a job
this.
at Toys R Us.
You had a job at Toys R Us too? Yeah, my sophomore year of college. I got a job at Toys R Us. It was only supposed to be seasonal, but I was such a passionate employee that they kept me on. And
Is this where the time you got arrested?
No, that's a different story altogether. But yeah, no, it was a lot of fun because, I mean, I love toys and I loved talking to people about toys, so it's kind of a perfect fit. But yeah, I would often run into spats with my supervisor because these guys would come in before like we opened. They'd be at the door waiting to come in, and then they would ask to just buy cases straight from the stock room, and I would tell them no, and then like they would
As
go,
you're taking cases to your car.
well, no, I would open them on the floor and put them on the pegs, and
Of
then
course. Yeah.
So I would tell my supervisor like, yeah, we can't do this. Kids aren't even gonna get a chance to ever get these figures, and he's like, look, we're selling them. That's what matters. Like we're in a business to sell these toys. You have to let these people buy these toys. But yeah, it was a conflict of interest a lot.
That never happened to my Toys R Us when I worked there, which was before the Star Wars Renaissance. That would have never flown. And when I was buying them in the early days of my shop, there was none around me that would let you buy a whole case.
Wow. See?
They would sometimes limit it to 2 figures or 5 figures of each variety.
Well, they were doing it on the up and up over there. So the thing we should talk about is how cool the vehicles were for this line too, because in many cases,
what's one case where they didn't nail it? I mean, I'll never forget seeing the X-Wing.
Yeah, they took the molds. I mean, because to be quite honest, Kenner knocked it out of the park with the original ones. They were gorgeous. Yeah. So they basically took what worked on that line and then just gave it a little bit more of a panache on the exterior, and then you get arguably like the benchmark for Star Wars toy vehicles. I mean, Hasbro's great. They make a lot of cool stuff. I would say that there's probably Millennium Falcons that came out around this era that are probably better than some of the stuff that's out now. I don't know.
I
just
would never.
Personal opinion.
Yeah,
personal opinion.
yeah.
Personal
That's your
opinion.
opinion.
My
That's your opinion.
I mean, these didn't fire.
But would those figures fit in there?
I don't know if they would.
Has anybody ever opened one to see?
Yeah, they did not fit. Chewbacca did not fit.
See?
When was Chewbacca flying an X-Wing?
He wouldn't fit in anything. Nobody would fit in these
Okay.
things.
That's true. And then we also got some variances too. We've got the flashback ones. I know there was one that came with Aunt Beru where she had like the
blue milk.
The blue milk and the droid, which I think is probably the most obscure toy that they made in the entire Power of the Force 2 line, was this robot that shows up to deliver them blue milk. But that's why I bought that figure, because I really didn't care to have an Aunt Beru figure, but I wanted that robot, so that was a big deal. And then we got some buff Star Troopers. This is the droid that I was telling you about that only ever shows up in the special edition, but there he is. And
I remember seeing the movie, and I took my roommate in college to see it with me, who was not a Star Wars fan. We're about 20 minutes into the re-release, and he goes, "What's with all the dinosaurs?" And I feel that's not a dinosaur, but what's coming up? It was like, yeah.
Oh, you mean this guy?
No, not Boss. No, I mean like 1,000 dewbacks, the little things scampering around.
Right.
Them.
We also only got a Biggs figure too, which I think was a criminal.
Long overdue.
Long overdue
Long
from the
overdue.
original line.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure some kids probably took one of the pilot Lukes and just kind of drew a mustache on him to make a Biggs figure. I don't know if anyone else did that. Okay. More Spider. There's Chewie. And Vader was pretty bulked up too. Vader was pretty bulked up. And then this guy, who also shows up for a few seconds to rat out our heroes. But these are the kind of guys that I was looking for, that I had to kind of move through, like the.
And again, not to harp on this, but that pistol barrel, very inefficient. That would not work well in the real universe.
See, here's where I'm going to disagree with you.
It's like a rifle.
Do you remember?
In pistol form.
This is completely off topic. But do you
The
remember?
NRA wouldn't like that.
The end of Batman, Joker shoots down the Batwing with a gun like
But
that.
it telescopes.
Yeah, but that might telescope.
It could.
Well, I mean, how do you know that's not a silencer? Isn't he more like a spy type of character?
He is a spy. I think that's.
Its length would defeat its purpose as a silencer. Yeah, attract a lot of attention.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
So here's another guy who also got an upgrade to a more screen-accurate costume, because again, I think he was one of those guys. They basically got the gymnast leotard. That was like one of the things that they were just doing to Kenner back in the time. Just I don't remember what he looked like. Put him in a leotard.
But you could see his mouth. That was what I remember as a kid. I wasn't really a kid anymore at this point, but I remember being like, "Oh yeah, he eats on the side. He talks from the side of his head."
Yeah,
That's what and I learned that from the figure, not the movie, which was I thought pretty cool.
I kind of always thought he was sort of like Groot when I was kind of a tree guy. Looks kind of like a tree guy. So there's some other new figures that we got. We got Pottsnick in there, and then we finally got a Mon Mothma too, which is a figure that I'm sure a lot of kids were really hankering to have. Very important character, dynamic. But my favorites were always the bounty hunters, and they killed it with these guys. They're great. You've got like just the wear and the dust and the fatigue on Forlom there, and then Zuckuss, who we learned earlier, was played by a woman.
That's right. Just learned that today.
Yeah, pretty great. So yeah, I used to actually cut these out and put them on my wall too. I was a huge nerd back then, but I didn't
It's
have
a safe space here.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I can open up. But the Shadows of the Empire figures in the expanded universe, where I think this line really found its legs. I don't know how many of you guys read like the Zahn trilogy or any of the literature. Yeah. Because again, back before these toys were, yeah, exactly. Those books are amazing. That's pretty much all you had for Star Wars before the prequels and the re-releases of the movies, and those books are fantastic.
And I don't know about you, but the toys I bought the toys, or even just seeing the toys, being like, "What the hell are these?" Had me then like read the books, get the comics. So that it was the toys again that got it started for me.
Did you ever play the Shadows of the Empire N64 game?
I did. I did.
It's a good game.
Briefly.
Yeah. And now we're finally actually possibly maybe getting some expanded universe stuff back in the
That's the rumor.
current Star Wars stuff, which I think would be great because again, that saga is fantastic, and Thrawn is probably one of the coolest villains out there.
Indeed.
Thing. And then some more vehicles. Again, TIE Fighter. Are you a TIE Fighter or X-Wing guy?
X-Wing.
Really? No, I'm a TIE Fighter.
X-Wing.
The TIE Fighters sound cooler though.
They do sound cooler. But
Really?
they do.
I'm going to go with you on the TIE Fighter.
Thank you. Do you have a preference? TIE Advance, TIE Bomber?
Oh, TIE Bomber for
Well,
sure.
TIE Interceptor if we're talking ties.
No, TIE Bomber.
TIE Bomber's pretty cool.
Weren't we just looking for a TIE Bomber
Yeah.
earlier?
You
We're
did
gonna
spend,
continue looking
admit it.
for a
30
TIE
minutes
bomber.
looking for a TIE Bomber. So there's some speculation, and this is completely unfounded. Rumors and chatter that the cruise missile trooper was not originally supposed to be part of the Star Wars lexicon, but it was something that was repurposed into that. And I spent a double of the time trying to nail this one down to no avail. So don't take this
Do you
as
know repurposed from what?
from a toy line that was never actually,
So something that never happened. They were
right.
like, yeah, just
Yeah,
put
that
Star
looks
Wars
like it
on
would fit in the Star Wars universe. But it's a cool design. I mean, it would be pretty fun to see one of those in the special editions, but
Well, it worked the other way too, where the Ewok village became Friar Tuck's
Sure.
town.
Yeah.
So why not go both ways?
exactly. And then we had these 3-packs too. There's one of our movie cameo guys. There was a bunch of these. One of these, which is my favorite, is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire original trilogy, is the Cantina Bar encounter with Dr. Avazin. We never found out what a doctor type he was, but that scene is fantastic. And then this guy, I don't know if you guys remember the creature that walks behind C-3PO for about a half second. I'm just like, what the hell was that? So it was the Bamar monk, exactly. Then I don't know how you guys know the backstory to this thing, but it's wild. They basically were monks who were so pious and dedicated to their philosophy that they decided to have their brains removed and put in a jar. And the spider, there he is. Yeah, which I think is a fantastic figure.
Brilliant. Yeah.
There's one
Super
over there,
creepy.
too.
There is, yeah. I don't know if you guys noticed or not, too, not to get ahead of things, but we do have.
No, we said that.
Huh? You set it up?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got some concept art on the table that you guys can take a look at later, and it's all the designs and sketches and ideas that were intended for this line that never actually made it. But there's some wild stuff.
We also have about 50 of these buttons or badges if anybody wants to come up after.
And there's the scene. Now, I don't know why they put them in these poses. They're like I feel like they should be riding horses, but I was super stoked to get this because that guy's great. He's probably the most honorary bar patron in all of
The history of bars.
Exactly. So there's a loose version of the Cruise Missile Trooper, and probably the coolest vehicle of the entire line, and probably any line is an AT-AT.
Until the bigger one came out
the
10
much
years
bigger one.
later.
Yeah.
Which still cannot believe was made.
Right, do you
I
have
hope they're
those?
making. I have 2 of them.
Two?
I hope they're making an even bigger one now.
How many do you have?
What, are the new ones?
Yeah.
0.
How many of the old ones?
1.
Okay, well, that's kind of what you need. There's some of our loose
Some more
heroes.
6-packs.
More
just to keep
6-packs.
this energy up.
And
Look at that
there's-
6-pack.
Luke with his gigantic lightsaber. The thing is like the size of him. It's kind of uncomfortable.
Wait, if we go back to the Lando, do you guys remember a rumor that there was some issue with the likeness of Billy D. Williams and that figure was being recalled?
Because it looked too much like him?
That something that they somehow lost the use of his likeness or something.
So
and
Billy D had some sort of
there was definitely this rumor because when I was buying those figures back in the day and they used to sell in my shop, that figure was very expensive because of this rumor, which I was certainly
Might
not
have
the one that
been,
started.
and again, I don't want to start rumors, but I heard it might have been connected directly to the whole Colt 45 of it all, the era, that Lando era. So could be that.
Okay.
It was a beer that I don't know if it exists, judging by the lack of reaction to that. But that was a beer that may or may not still exist that he was selling while actively promoting Return of the Jedi.
And then we also got another glaring absence from the original series, which is Grand Moff Tarkin, which he was one of the first of the Power of the Force 2 figures that
That's
I
right.
because I wanted to have him. I'd say the first month or so, my intention was not to complete this line in earnest. I was just like, I'll just pick up a few figures to complete my vintage line and call it a day. That obviously didn't happen, but Tarkin was one of the ones that I definitely wanted to grab because he kind of fits in pretty well with the other ones. And then, of course, our loose vehicles. And then there's Aunt Beru. I don't know, she doesn't have the robot with her, unfortunately. And
Excellent.
then Dash Rengar there, who is one of the coolest characters the entire Shadows saga, and Veers. But this Darth Vader with the removable helmet might be my favorite line or figure from that entire Power of the Force 2
Another
line.
figure where I was like, when I saw it in the stores, because I was not really on the internet yet, I remember being like, oh my God, they can do anything now. Like, I just remember being blown away that they actually could have that detail and how great it looked, or how great it looked for them. Now it's even a lot better, but still, that was mind-blowing at the time.
Oh, absolutely. So, were there figures that you wish they would have made for the Power of the Force 2 line that they didn't? Is there something that you felt like they left on the table?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I was just so blown away by the quality of what they were making. From my point of view, the making fun of how they looked, I only started hearing about that years later. So I love them, and I never was like, oh, I wish they'd do this, or oh, I wish they'd do that. I was just so grateful they were making new Star Wars toys.
Yeah, I feel like it brought in an entire generation of new Star Wars collectors. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who these figures were their first Star Wars figures.
Yeah,
and
of course.
They're very fondly remembered, and I think they get a bad rap because, no one's retiring on their complete carded collection of Power of the Force 2, but I feel like that's not fair. It's not fair to the figures to, just because they're not as valuable as the other ones, that they are somehow inferior, when in fact, they really, took what the original vintage line did and maximized and succeeded it in many ways.
As Rich knows, the first cut of the Star Wars episode, which was the first episode that we cut for the whole series, was Star Wars. It was closer to 3 hours long than 2 hours long, and we had to get it under an hour. And without a doubt, the most painful thing to cut was this section of the episode, for two reasons. One is it was very personal to me because I remember the era in which they came out, and I remember being so blown away by the whole thing. But also, I knew when the show came out, if people liked the show, there would be a lot of people saying, I don't understand. How come? Where was this? Where was that? So this was a very, very, very painful thing to cut from that first episode.
We could have probably done an entire second episode just on
Absolutely.
everything because
And Vlix, don't forget Vlix.
Exactly, and I feel like a lot
I'm
of people
obsessed with Vlix. If you don't know who Vlix is, check out Vlix. Great story.
If any of you guys know where a Vlix figure is, let him know, and he'll talk to you after the panel.
Big DVD extra on Vlix. For those of you who are like, why can't we learn more about Vlix? Buy the DVD.
And it'll all be explained. But yeah, no, I love this line personally. I think, given another 10 or 20 years, it's gonna have a lot more appreciation. No? Maybe?
No.
Not so much?
No.
Pie in the sky? I mean, the other important thing about this line too is it's been uninterrupted ever since. Ever since Power of the Force 2 came out, there was Power of the Jedi, and then there was the blue-carded Legacy Saga figures, and I mean, we've had Star Wars figures on the shelves ever since these figures came out, so we wouldn't have Star Wars toys today.
They did something right.
Yeah, they did something right.
We out of slides? Hey!
Slides. Do you guys have any questions for us?
Oh, there's one right there.
Billy Galaxy. Billy Galaxy, vintage toys and collectibles.
Who else?
Back there in the black shirt.
Do you think Hasbro had it in their minds to make all of these misprints / modifications to the figures for sale?
The errors, like the
Those are running production changes.
I mean, it's okay. Great. It's very common. I mean, dishwashers. The first year of a dishwasher being sold, the last dishwasher sold in that month 12 has a lot of things changed from the first one that left the factory, but nobody collects dishwashers, so nobody cares. So it's a similar thing to that. You know, something that just happened to me recently that blew my mind was Lego just put out this beautiful 90-year anniversary Steamboat Willie. It's gorgeous, and I'm supposed to be a big toy expert. I posted a picture of it being like, I can't believe this. And people were like, oh my God, you got one of the mistakes. You got one of the mistakes. And they put it out. It was supposed to be like number 25, and it was number 24. So if Lego can make a mistake in 2019, and Lego, like, they don't really make mistakes to a certain degree, yeah, I don't think this was anything on purpose.
I think if things are moving so fast and furious too, and they're trying to get these figures out, that I mean, it's kind of like what Jim says in the original episode with Luke's hair color.
Right.
You know, a lot of people think that that was some sort of deliberate precision, but you know, he's just like, no, these things happen. You know.
On purpose may have been adding mediocre CGI to an already perfect movie in the hope to sell more toys. That I do believe was not subtle. Yeah, and on purpose.
To that end, what would be considered the most valuable figure or item from the Power of the Force 2 line due to maybe some of those errors? Or what is the most
This is
valuable?
not true, but I just
It's
want to say...
probably some version of that Boba Fett.
You win.
Great throw, Billy. Great throw.
I didn't want to hurt the guy in front.
You tried.
And you stepped on my Vlix joke.
You know-
I have a bet to see if I can say Vlix 10 times at this panel.
You're at like 7 right now.
All right, I'm almost there.
I
It's all
actually,
yours.
in earnest, was trying to find out if there is some sort of grail piece to the Power of the Force 2 line, and nothing really stands out. I mean, nothing's really, you know, legitimately like that one piece you have to have.
I mean, there's like, you know, they'd planned to make the Ponda Baba freeze frame, and I think there's some test marketer
right, I
toy
think
fair
you'd have
samples of that kind of thing, and they replaced it
You'd have
last
to get
minute with
like,
Leia Hoth.
production samples and prototypes. I mean, that stuff is always going to have some sort of, you know, high aftermarket value. But I think right now is the time if you want to collect this line, go downstairs and have at it. There's about a dozen booths that have a lot of them. You over there.
It'd probably be a last wave of free screens with Google Clouds, the week waste, $300. I think that was like the one that helped us value.
There you go. Weak way.
You
Another
should
great
be up
figure.
here.
Everything you guys said, I totally agree with.
Well, thank you.
I say it on the forums all the time, and people are like, those stories suck.
All right, Chris says the guy back there with a blue hat,
Thank you.
a black hat.
The vehicles, were they made from the exact same molds as the original line, or did they have to make new molds?
In some cases, they actually reused the molds in earnest from the original line and put new stickers on, retooled. I mean, there was retooling that happened, but at least with the first series and a couple of the immediate releases afterwards, they went back and got those, but then they ended up making...
There's
entirely
actually a
molds.
prototype ATST on this table over here that you can look at, where they used the body of it's a production body, and they wanted to test the molds on the guns and limbs. So the limbs on it are all test shots that they threw on the original body to, you know, I mean, they used the exact same molds on it. They just changed the copyright information when they went into production.
But a well-known story is towards the end of the run, the Millennium Falcon mold did break or was beginning to degrade where they couldn't use it anymore. And that led directly to the gigantic Millennium Falcon that came out.
There was a 2004, or there was a 2008 is the one I feel like is the definitive one that
Yeah,
everyone talked. Where you
but
can
the
actually
huge one.
walk into the cockpit.
Yeah,
yes, that one's
yeah.
gorgeous.
But the breaking down of the original mold is what led to that huge one being built.
Yeah, and the same guy designed all of those,
Mark,
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Who is here? Not here, but
Somewhere.
somewhere in Celebration.
Over there.
Also, Scott Simmons, are you out there? Scott, can you stand up? So Scott and his dad actually. Many of you know Scott Simmons, his dad, Kim Simmons, and Kim, who obviously took all the incredible photographs of all the packaging and card arts in the original series. So Scott was a big part of taking the card backing photos and packaging photos from the Power of the Force 2 line, and they're also wonderful. So thank you, Scott, for being a part of that.
Actually, also, Kim Simmons, Scott's dad, is doing a panel here tomorrow about his vintage photography. So if you want to see more about that, come out to that tomorrow. Any more questions?
Well, I really love the expanded universe line, and I thought it was very close to, for me, it was almost like a vintage original Kenner line than the more current ones. But were there going to be any vehicles or play sets playing with that? Because it just was like the figures that came out.
There were plans to do that. Nothing's ever really kind of, come to the surface as far as like prototypes and whatnot, but I think there were bigger plans for that expanded universe too. I don't know if it was a matter of just not catching on as much as they thought it would. I know it was kind of a niche thing to begin with, but I mean, like you said, for what it was, it nailed those characters perfectly.
Any other questions? Anybody? Over here.
So those classic figures they released, like the classic 4-pack, they were like from the vintage molds.
Yeah, the Toys R Us.
Yeah,
pack, yeah.
that was in a Power of the Force packaging. So do you guys consider those Power of the Force figures?
I think it would be considered Power of the Force too, yeah.
Yeah, because it was kind
I mean,
of.
I think anything with that red saber packaging, you could kind of lump in with Power of the Force too. I mean, they even rebranded the little die-cast Action Masters into that packaging as soon as those figures came out.
Got a question right over there.
Raise your hand.
Every once in a while, you needed to make sure you got to Toys R Us to get certain figures.
Oh, sorry.
What? It used to be you would go to Toys R Us to get certain figures because that would be when they were released. Do we have a new spot?
This has been something that has been eating away at me ever since Toys R Us went down, and I know there's, a somewhat of an effort from places like Target and Walmart to bolster their toy aisles to kind of fill the void of Toys R Us, but you're never going to replace an entire dedicated brick and mortar store like that with just adding a few extra aisles. And you notice it when you go in, instead of having an entire 8-foot section of Star Wars figures, now you have 2 or 3. And I feel like, not just me, a lot of people out there, and this is something I've heard a lot, is it's harder to complete a collection. It's harder to find all the figures you're looking for when you have a limited amount of space and distribution isn't quite as prolific as it was back then. So I'm curious as to where this is going to go.
Well, what I do now, and the good news is I just got an Apple Watch, so this is the best news ever for my Apple Watch. I used to go to the Toys R Us. Our office is in Burbank, California, and I used to go to the Toys R Us, and Rich and I would frequently bump into each other like a Charlie Chaplin movie. But now what I do is there is a mall a little bit further away and in this, it's the weirdest thing. It's like I don't know how common this is or isn't, but it has a Walmart and a Target and a GameStop. And so what I literally do is I park at the Walmart, go in the Walmart, go to the toy section, walk to the Target, walk to the GameStop. Oh, and then they have a Best Buy too.
They do.
So that is what, for me, has replaced Toys R Us. And then whatever I can't find is eBay or Amazon or Big Bad Toy Store or whatever. But yeah, I definitely, and I will say this, I mean, literally, when Toys R Us went out of business, other than anything connected to my family, it's one of the saddest things that's ever happened to me. But, and I mean it, it's cheesy, and I'm very blessed to be able to say that, I realize. But that being said, I mean, there were times I went to Toys R Us 15 times in a row and couldn't find what I was looking for. So nostalgia tends to make things feel a little bit better than they might have been at the time. But At the very least, I get my steps in before 2:30 now. So thank you, Jeffrey, for going away.
You did leave Toys R Us with something pretty special.
Oh yeah, I got the entrance sign from the Toys R Us that we went to at what I think was a ridiculously low price, $50. It's crazy, right? Anybody have $51?
Anyone else?
Any questions?
By the way, I so badly want to do the repeat the question thing when I watch panels that I never understand when the person has the microphone. I'm going to do it with you. Here we go.
I waited. What kind of lines are you guys collecting like right now?
The question is, what kind of lines are we collecting now? One word. Eagle moss.
Oh my God.
They've
got you.
Like a lunatic. I literally said to my wife a couple months ago about something having nothing to do with anything. I texted her, I go, I got good news. And she texted back, did Eagle Moss go out of business? Like, that's literally how crazy I am with Eagle Moss. So Eagle Moss, and I don't know if anybody knows Brian Stillman. He made a great Star Wars doc called Plastic Galaxy. Well, thanks to Brian Stillman, I have become obsessed with the David Lynch version of Dune. And anything. Thanks to Billy, I got a party hat for a 5-year-old's head. Because why wouldn't a 5-year-old like David Lynch's Dune? I got the bed sheets and the pillowcases. I got the prototype gurney. So Eagle Moss, Dune.
I'm collecting a lot of Super 7 stuff. I love everything that Brian puts out.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job. Not you. They have a series of 3 3/4 original ideas called The Worst. And I think they're the most amazing 3 3/4 figures that I've seen in some time. They're all these like wild, harebrained character ideas, but yeah, they're great. And I'm also going back and collecting a bunch of Power Rangers stuff before the episode comes out, and all that stuff gets really expensive. So I'm going back and trying to collect Power Rangers. The Power Rangers, again, off topic, but working on that episode has given me a new love for Japanese Chikogan. You'll see.
If everybody wants to like lose their homes and maybe families, sell a TV show about your passion. And then it's a great way to spend all your money on stuff. Like I had never bought anything He-Man in my life until making the show. And now I literally have an entire shelf, not just dedicated to He-Man, but like now of course I'm into the prototypes and other stuff. I really shouldn't be. But anyway, Billy?
For me, it'd be LJN's Dungeons and Dragons toy line from the mid-'80s. That's one of my all-time favorites. It's right up there with Star Wars for me. In fact, when I was a kid, when I played with them, I always used to use the Gamorrean Guard as an orc for the D&D figures.
Do you have any of those puzzles? Those really kind of rudimentary puzzles, the D&D cartoons?
Oh, yeah, the ones with like 8 pieces?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby the Barbarian and Uni and all that.
Yeah.
Of
You
course.
have those?
Yeah.
I'm looking for
Do you want some?
Yes,
Okay.
I'd love some. Okay, we'll talk later. Anybody else up there? Oh, got a couple over there.
What is your guys' like favorite line of Star Wars figures? Like, what do you think was the best one?
The first one.
I like anything from Empire because Empire is my favorite. So all of those figures from that movie are my favorite.
I mean, I'm going to give you an honest answer, even though it's not really answering your question. I'm just really into characters. So, like, my favorite character is Jedi Luke. I love that there are, like, over a dozen versions of Jedi Luke. My second favorite character is Ahsoka Tano, who's obviously less than half as old as Jedi Luke. And I love that, like, I'm able to, I think you just taught me this expression recently, Billy, a focus collection? Is that what you call it? Yeah.
I know nothing about that.
I have a focus collection in Jedi Luke and Ahsoka Tano, and that's actually also Emperor Palpatine as well. And like, so just today, I know Ahsoka, brand new, beautiful figure coming out this summer. And same thing, Black Series putting out a new Emperor. The Emperor's fine, but it's coming with, in my opinion, the best version of the chair I've ever seen. So that's what I love, that you can get a 1983 era Emperor, a 1995 Emperor, yada, yada, yada. Did I create a commotion?
You might have.
So there's Power of the Force 2 and Ninja Turtles. What else is going to be coming out in season 3?
We got a little wrestling, little WWE, and every other kind of wrestling there have been toys for, and also My Little Pony, which is a fantastic. We deal a lot with. I didn't watch the Barbie episode. For about 5 months, and then around between month 5 and month 6. I watched the Barbie episode, and it's great, and it might be better than all the other episodes. So then by the time season 2 came out, everybody from the get-go was, I watched all of them. Hello Kitty too. So for those of you who are already in that group, thank you. For those of you who aren't, and nothing to take away from any of the other toys, the My Little Pony episode it's awesome, not just because it's My Little Pony, but it's a great story. A really, really good story.
Yeah, don't sleep on any of the episodes this season. They're all gonna be great. My bias aside.
I think that was a great last question. These guys will be up here for a little bit longer if you want to come up and ask them any more questions. But let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.